How could a quiet librarian who spent her days cataloging books become the voice that coordinated devastating partisan attacks across an entire region? What secret did the bespectacled woman in the worn cardigan hide from the Nazi patrols that passed her every single day? Why did German intelligence spend 2 years hunting for a radio operator they called Ghost 7, never suspecting she sat just 300 meters from their headquarters? Today, we reveal the story they tried to erase. This is the account of Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova, an ordinary Soviet librarian who became the invisible thread connecting dozens of partisan units. A woman whose whispered radio transmissions orchestrated operations that destroyed supply lines, eliminated enemy officers, and saved countless lives. The Nazis searched for her relentlessly. They executed suspects. They deployed direction-finding equipment across the entire district. But they never imagined that the woman who smiled politely as she stamped their library cards was the Ghost 7 they hunted. This is her story. A story of courage hidden in plain sight. A story the occupiers classified and buried because it revealed their greatest vulnerability. The fact that resistance could flourish in the most unexpected places, carried forward by the most unlikely heroes. Before the war, Yekaterina Mikhailovna lived a life of profound quietness. She was 32 years old in the spring of 1941. She had worked at the district library in the town of Lepel, in the Vitebsk region of Belorussia, for 11 years. The library occupied the ground floor of a pre-revolutionary merchant's house on Lenin Street. 3 rooms, 14,000 volumes, oak tables worn smooth by generations of readers, the smell of old paper and floor wax, windows that looked out onto chestnut trees that bloomed white every May. Yekaterina lived alone in a small apartment above a bakery on the next street. She had never married. Her parents had died within a year of each other when she was 24. Her younger brother Dmitri served in the Red Army, stationed somewhere near Minsk. She wrote to him every week. He responded when he could. She kept his letters in a wooden box lined with blue velvet. Her daily routine possessed the comforting rhythm of ritual. She arrived at the library precisely at 8 in the morning. She prepared tea in the small back room that served as both kitchen and storage. She unlocked the front doors at 8:30. Patrons came and went, students preparing for examinations, elderly pensioners seeking newspapers, factory workers borrowing novels, children arriving after school for fairy tales and adventure stories. She knew every book's location without consulting the card catalog she had meticulously maintained. She could recommend titles based on the smallest hint of interest. She remembered what each regular patron had borrowed and would set aside new arrivals she thought they might enjoy. The district cultural committee had twice recognized her for excellence in promoting socialist literacy. People thought they knew her. The quiet librarian. Reserved but kind, helpful but never intrusive. She wore the same 3 dresses in rotation: gray, dark blue, brown. Sensible shoes. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Wire-rimmed spectacles that constantly slipped down her nose. She spoke softly. She rarely smiled. But when she did, it transformed her entire face. What no one knew was that Yekaterina possessed another skill entirely, a skill she had acquired almost by accident and had practiced in secret for years. In 1933, the library had received a donation of technical manuals from a closed radio factory. The books sat unpacked for months. Yekaterina eventually cataloged them out of obligation, not interest, but she found herself reading them. The principles of wireless transmission fascinated her, the mathematics of frequency and wavelength, the elegance of Morse code, the idea that invisible signals could travel vast distances, carrying messages through the air. She began visiting the town's radio club on Tuesday evenings. The club consisted of 6 enthusiastic amateurs who built receivers and transmitters in a basement workshop. They welcomed the shy librarian who asked such thoughtful questions. She learned circuit design. She learned antenna theory. She learned to send and receive code until her fingers moved faster than conscious thought. By 1937, Yekaterina held an amateur radio license with the call sign RW3SK. She had built her own transceiver using components salvaged from broken radios and purchased with money saved from her modest salary. She kept it hidden in a cabinet in her apartment, operating only late at night when her neighbors slept. She made contacts across the Soviet Union. She participated in contests. She exchanged technical information with operators from Leningrad to Vladivostok. No one knew. Not her colleagues, not her few friends, not even her brother. It was her private world. Her secret garden where the quiet librarian became someone else entirely, someone confident and capable and connected to something larger than the circumscribed routine of her visible life. Then came June 22nd, 1941. Yekaterina was shelving returned books when the radio in the back room began broadcasting the announcement. German forces had invaded the Soviet Union. The Great Patriotic War had begun. She stood motionless, a volume of Pushkin's poetry still in her hands, listening to Molotov's voice declaring that the enemy would be defeated. The first weeks passed in a haze of fear and confusion. The library remained open, though fewer patrons came. People gathered around radios in public spaces, listening to bulletins that grew increasingly ominous. The Red Army was retreating. The Germans advanced with terrifying speed. Town after town fell. By July 10th, Wehrmacht forces had reached the outskirts of Leppel. The sound of artillery echoed across the lake. Soviet troops withdrew during the night. By dawn, German motorcycles roared down Lenin Street. Armored cars followed. Then trucks filled with soldiers. Then tanks that tore up the cobblestones with their tracks. The occupation began. Within days, the Nazis established a military commandant's office in the former Communist Party headquarters, exactly 300 meters from the library. The main Wehrmacht garrison occupied the old cavalry barracks on the northern edge of town. A Gestapo detachment set up operations in the requisitioned Hotel Europa. Patrols appeared on every corner. Checkpoints controlled movement. Proclamations in Russian and German covered every wall. All Jews were ordered to register. Within weeks, they were forced into a ghetto in the poorest district. Public executions of suspected partisans and communist officials took place in the market square. The bodies were left hanging for days as warnings. Yekaterina kept the library open. The German commandant, a Wehrmacht major named Reinhardt, issued an order that cultural institutions were to continue functioning to demonstrate the normalcy of the new administration. The library would serve both Soviet citizens and German personnel. German soldiers began appearing as patrons. They borrowed German novels and technical manuals. They studied Russian-German dictionaries. Some were polite. Others were curt. A few were openly contemptuous. Yekaterina stamped their cards with the same efficient courtesy she showed everyone. She spoke when spoken to. She kept her eyes down. She appeared utterly unremarkable. And she listened. She heard them discussing supply schedules as they browsed the shelves. She heard them complaining about partisan attacks in the forests. She heard them mentioning which roads were considered safe and which required heavy escort. She heard them reveal, in casual conversation, intelligence that would be invaluable to resistance forces. But there were no resistance forces. Not yet. The partisans were still scattered remnants, isolated groups of Red Army stragglers and local volunteers hiding in the swamps and forests, uncoordinated, desperate, poorly armed. They conducted small raids but lacked organization and intelligence. Yekaterina's brother Dmitri had not written since before the invasion. She received a letter in August from his unit's political officer. Dmitri had been killed in action near Smolensk on July 19th, defending a river crossing. He died a hero of the Soviet Union. She was to be proud. She read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the blue velvet box with all his other letters. She did not cry. Not then. She walked to the library through streets filled with German vehicles and set about her daily work with mechanical precision. That night, alone in her apartment, she retrieved her radio transceiver from its hiding place. The decision formed with absolute clarity. She would do what she could. She possessed skills. She had access to information. She would find a way to make those things matter. She began by simply listening. The Soviet frequencies she had once used for amateur contacts now carried military traffic. Much of it was encrypted or fragmentary, but occasionally she picked up transmissions in clear. Partisan groups attempting to coordinate. Red Army units behind German lines requesting instructions. Soviet intelligence trying to establish contact with resistance cells. She listened for hours every night, mapping frequencies, identifying call signs, learning patterns. She kept meticulous notes in a cipher of her own invention, disguised as library cataloging records. To anyone examining them, they appeared to be mundane notations about book conditions and shelf locations. In reality, they documented an entire invisible network. On September 3, 1941, she heard a transmission that changed everything. A partisan group operating in the forests northeast of Lepel was attempting to contact Soviet military intelligence. They had information about a German fuel depot, but no way to relay it to forces that could act on it. The transmission was brief, repeated 3 times, then silence. Yekaterina checked the frequency. She verified the call sign against her notes. Then, hands trembling slightly, she keyed her transmitter. She identified herself using a call sign she invented on the spot. Ghost 7. She acknowledged their transmission. She asked them to repeat their intelligence. She copied the details. Location, security arrangements, supply schedules. She promised to relay the information to relevant units. Then she went hunting through other frequencies until she found a Soviet partisan coordinator transmitting from somewhere far to the east. She relayed the intelligence. She provided precise details. She signed off before questions could be asked. 3 nights later, she heard reports of a successful attack on a German fuel depot northeast of Lepel. The entire facility had been destroyed. German casualties were listed as 17 dead, 32 wounded. Yekaterina sat at her small kitchen table, her transceiver still warm from operation, and understood that she had found her war. Over the following months, she transformed herself into the ghost the Nazis would never catch. Her system was simple but devastatingly effective. She had access to German personnel who spoke freely in what they considered a safe civilian environment. She had a powerful radio capable of reaching across hundreds of kilometers. She had the technical skill to operate on multiple frequencies and use simple codes. And she had the perfect cover of the quiet librarian, whose presence was so unremarkable as to be essentially invisible. She established regular contact with 7 different partisan groups operating within a 100-kilometer radius. She assigned each a number based on their geographic location. Group 1 operated to the north, Group 2 to the northeast, and so on in a clockwise pattern. She never used their actual unit designations. She never asked for names or specific locations. She maintained strict operational security. She would collect intelligence during the day at the library. German officers discussing a convoy schedule. Wehrmacht engineers complaining about a bridge requiring constant guard, a Gestapo agent mentioning an upcoming sweep operation in a particular forest sector. She memorized everything. She confirmed details when possible by checking maps and German newspapers. She cross-referenced information from multiple sources. At night, she would transmit brief bursts of Morse code on varying frequencies. She rarely spent more than 3 minutes on any single transmission to avoid detection by German direction-finding equipment. She used a simple substitution code that changed weekly. She identified herself only as Ghost 7. The partisan groups learned to trust her completely. Her intelligence was always accurate. Her timing was always precise. She never exaggerated. She never speculated. She provided facts, coordinates, and schedules. The partisans did the rest. In November 1941, information she relayed enabled a coordinated attack on 3 German supply columns simultaneously. The ambushes occurred within a 15-minute window across 30 kilometers of forest roads. The Germans lost 27 trucks, 48 soldiers, and significant quantities of ammunition and winter equipment. It took them 4 days to recover the bodies and clear the roads. In January 1942, she transmitted warning of a planned German sweep operation targeting partisan winter camps in the marshes south of Lake Lapel. 7 groups received her alert 48 hours before the operation began. They evacuated their camps and established an ambush for the German forces. The Nazis walked into a trap. 83 German soldiers died in the frozen swamps. The partisans suffered 4 casualties. By March 1942, German intelligence had become aware that someone was coordinating partisan activities in the Lepel district with unprecedented effectiveness. They designated this unknown operator Ghost 7 based on intercepts. They launched a systematic effort to locate and eliminate the source. Direction-finding teams deployed across the region. Counterintelligence officers interviewed civilians suspected of resistance sympathies. The Gestapo executed 32 people on suspicion of being the mysterious radio operator. Troops conducted house-to-house searches looking for illegal transmitters. Yekaterina knew they were hunting her. She heard Germans in the library discussing the search. She adjusted her procedures. She shortened transmission times. She varied her broadcasting locations. Twice a month, she would disassemble her transceiver and relocate it to temporary sites. A barn on the edge of town. A basement in an abandoned house. A hidden position in the attic of the library itself, accessed through a concealed panel she had discovered while cataloging old storage areas. She operated with ice-cold discipline. Never the same frequency twice in succession. Never a pattern they could predict. Never more than necessary. She became smoke. The library continued its routine. German soldiers borrowed books. Wehrmacht officers attended a lecture series on Russian literature that Yekaterina organized at the commandant's suggestion. An oberst who fancied himself cultured praised her dedication to maintaining civilized standards despite the unfortunate circumstances of occupation. She smiled politely. She stamped his books. And that night, she transmitted the details of a security convoy he had mentioned in passing conversation with a fellow officer. 3 days later, that convoy was ambushed near the village of Domzhirici. The partisan attack destroyed 6 trucks and captured 42 Wehrmacht rifles, 12 machine guns, and 2 mortars. The oberst himself was wounded and evacuated to a field hospital in Minsk. By summer 1942, Ghost 7 had become a legend among partisan forces. Soviet military intelligence attempted to make direct contact, but she refused. She maintained her independence. She would coordinate and relay information, but she would not subordinate herself to any command structure that might compromise her security or effectiveness. Her reputation among the Germans grew equally dark. The Ghost 7 transmissions were considered high-priority intelligence targets. The SS dispatched a specialized radio counterintelligence unit from Minsk. They brought sophisticated detection equipment and experienced operators. Yekaterina adapted again. She reduced transmission frequency to twice weekly. She relocated her transceiver to a new hiding spot every 10 days. She developed a network of dead drops where Partisan couriers could leave requests, and she could leave coded responses. She taught 3 trusted contacts basic Morse code so they could serve as backup operators if necessary. The close calls multiplied. In August, a German direction-finding team traced one of her transmissions to within a 4-block radius. She heard them conducting building-by-building searches. She calmly continued her shift at the library, cataloging new arrivals, while Wehrmacht soldiers ransacked apartments 2 streets away. They never thought to search the library. It was too obvious, too public, too impossible. In October, a Gestapo investigation focused on radio club members. 5 were arrested. 2 were executed after interrogation revealed nothing. The quiet librarian who had once attended Tuesday meetings was somehow overlooked in their records. Perhaps her attendance had been too irregular. Perhaps her name had been misspelled and misfiled. Perhaps she had simply been too forgettable. She attended the burial of the 2 executed radio enthusiasts. She stood with other mourners in the Orthodox cemetery. She kept her face expressionless. Later, in the darkness of her apartment, she wept for men who had taught her the skills that now served the resistance. Then she composed herself and prepared the night's transmission. The intelligence she relayed that night led to an ambush that killed 17 German soldiers and destroyed a half-track vehicle carrying radio equipment. The war ground on. The partisan movement grew stronger, more organized, better armed. Soviet forces began their great counteroffensive in the east. The Germans dug in for the terrible winter of 1942. Their advance finally halted, their invincibility shattered at Stalingrad. In Lepel, Yekaterina maintained her routine. Library, transmission. Library, transmission. A life split between visibility and invisibility, between the woman everyone saw and the woman no one suspected. January 1943 brought new complications. The Germans established a dedicated counterintelligence center in Lepel specifically to locate Ghost 7. They installed monitoring equipment in the commandant's building. They expanded patrols. They implemented a curfew and restricted civilian movement. Yekaterina adjusted by reducing her operational tempo and increasing her security measures. But the intelligence kept coming. German officers still spoke freely in the library. Wehrmacht reports were still filed in offices with careless security. The occupation had lasted so long that the occupiers had grown comfortable, routine, less vigilant about operational security in civilian settings. She documented troop movements. She tracked supply deliveries. She identified visiting officers and their units. She noted which roads were being improved and which bridges were being reinforced. Every detail went into her coded notebooks and eventually into partisan hands via radio or courier. On March 15, 1943, she transmitted intelligence that would prove pivotal. A German signals officer had spent an afternoon in the library writing letters home. He had complained to a colleague about the difficulty of maintaining communications equipment in the spring mud. He had mentioned specific relay stations and their locations. He had noted which stations had the best security and which were vulnerable. Yekaterina mapped 6 German radio relay stations in a network that stretched from Lepel to Vitebsk. She transmitted the locations, security details, and operational patterns to Partisan Command. She recommended coordinated strikes. On March 22nd, all 6 relay stations were attacked simultaneously. The partisan raids occurred within a 12-minute window. The Germans had no time to respond or reinforce. Every station was destroyed. The equipment was wrecked. The operators were killed or captured. German communications in the entire district collapsed for 72 hours. The Wehrmacht response was furious. Mass arrests, public executions, house searches. The Gestapo brought in an entire counterintelligence company from Army Group Center. The Ghost 7 hunt intensified to obsessive levels. They knew the operator was in or near Leppel. They narrowed the possible locations. They analyzed transmission timing and developed profiles. They concluded Ghost 7 was likely male, educated, possibly a former military signals operator hidden among the civilian population. They never considered the quiet librarian, but they came dangerously close. On April 7, 1943, a new Gestapo officer arrived in Leppel, Hauptsturmführer Erich Kessler, 38 years old, experienced in counterintelligence operations in occupied France, methodical, patient, intelligent. He took personal command of the Ghost 7 investigation. Kessler's approach differed from his predecessors. He did not conduct dramatic raids or brutal interrogations. Instead, he observed, he analyzed, he looked for patterns in daily life. He identified every person in Leppel who possessed technical knowledge or had access to information. He compiled lists. He conducted subtle surveillance. Yekaterina first saw him in the library on April 12th. He wore civilian clothes. He browsed the technical section. He selected a book on electromagnetic theory and brought it to her desk. "This is an excellent collection," he said in accented but correct Russian. His eyes were gray and very cold. "You maintain it well." "Thank you," she replied. She opened his library card. "Herr Kessler, an address at the Hotel Europa, Gestapo headquarters. You are interested in technical subjects? I studied electrical engineering before the war. It remains a hobby." He smiled thinly. "I find libraries civilized places, quiet, orderly, full of knowledge." She stamped his book. He thanked her and left. He returned 3 days later. Different book. Same polite conversation. He asked if she had worked at the library long. She confirmed 11 years. He remarked that she must know every book by heart. She smiled modestly and agreed. She knew the collection well. He came twice more that week, always cordial, never threatening. But Yekaterina felt the danger radiating from him like heat from a stove. He was not like the other Germans. He saw more. He thought more. He was hunting, and he was very good at it. She reviewed her security procedures. Everything was as tight as possible. Her transceiver was hidden in a basement compartment beneath a false floor panel in a storage room of the library's cellar. The entrance was concealed behind shelves of duplicate volumes. She accessed it only late in the evening when the building was empty and the streets quiet. She transmitted from deep underground, surrounded by thick stone walls that damped her signal and made direction finding more difficult. But Kessler's presence changed the equation. She made a decision. She would reduce her operational frequency again. She would take even fewer risks. She would wait for him to lose interest or move on to other suspects. On April 28th, Partisan intelligence sent her an urgent request via courier. A high-value target had been identified. Standartenführer Hans Dreyer, SS security commander for the entire Vitebsk region, would be traveling through Leppel on May 2nd. He would overnight at the Hotel Europa before continuing to an inspection tour of security installations. The partisans wanted to kill him. They needed confirmation of arrival time, security arrangements, and vehicle details. Yekaterina knew the risk. Any intelligence gathering about a high-level SS officer would be dangerous. Kessler was already watching closely. But Dreyer was a war criminal responsible for mass executions across the region. His death would be a significant victory. She spent the next 2 days carefully observing and listening. She learned that Dreyer would arrive on May 2nd at approximately 3 in the afternoon. He would travel with a 6-vehicle convoy. Security would include 25 SS troops. He would stay in a suite on the 2nd floor of the Hotel Europa. Departure was scheduled for 8 in the morning on May 3rd. She transmitted the intelligence on April 30th at 2 in the morning. Brief burst, 3 minutes, everything the partisans needed. What she did not know was that Kessler had implemented a new surveillance protocol. Every transmission from Leppel was now triangulated by 3 direction-finding stations operating continuously. The technology was the newest available. The operators were the most experienced. They caught her signal. The triangulation was not perfect. The stone walls and underground location created distortions, but they narrowed the source to a small area in the center of town, an area that included the library. Kessler reviewed the data the next morning. He studied maps. He considered possibilities. The library was an unlikely location. Too public, too accessible, too obvious. But his engineering background made him think about signal propagation and the effects of building materials on radio transmission. Stone buildings, basements. The signal characteristics suggested underground broadcast. He decided to investigate personally. On May 1st, Kessler arrived at the library 30 minutes before closing. He selected books from various sections. He wandered through the rooms. He noted the back areas. He asked Yekaterina casually about storage facilities. "We have a cellar," she said. "Old volumes, duplicates, some damaged books awaiting repair." "Might I see it? I am curious about 19th century architectural details. The building is quite old." Yekaterina felt ice form in her chest, but she maintained her expression of polite service. "Of course, though there is little to see, simply storage and foundation walls." She led him down the stairs to the cellar. A single dim bulb illuminated shelves stacked with books. Stone walls glistened with moisture. The air smelled of mildew and old paper. Kessler examined the space with apparent casualness. He paced the length. He studied the walls. He seemed genuinely interested in the architecture. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The craftsmanship of these stones." Yekaterina stood near the stairs, willing her heartbeat to slow. Her transceiver was less than 3 meters away, hidden behind a false panel in the back wall. The panel was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She had constructed it herself, matching the stone and mortar precisely. Kessler spent 5 minutes examining the cellar. Then he smiled and thanked her for the tour. They returned upstairs. He checked out his books and left. Yekaterina locked the library at 6. She walked home through streets already filling with evening shadows. She prepared a simple dinner she could not eat. She sat at her small table and thought through her situation with absolute clarity. Kessler suspected. He might not be certain, but he suspected. The coincidence of the signal triangulation and the library's location was too precise. He would return. He would search more carefully. He would find the transceiver. She had to move it. Tonight. At 10:30, she left her apartment. The streets were empty under curfew. She moved through familiar shadows using routes she had memorized. She reached the library through a back alley. She used her key in the service entrance. Inside, she moved in complete darkness. She knew every inch of this building. She descended to the cellar. Only then did she risk a small flashlight. She removed the false panel. She extracted her transceiver from its hiding place. The radio represented 2 years of operations, hundreds of transmissions, intelligence that had saved countless lives and killed numerous enemies. She disconnected the antenna wire that ran through conduits to a concealed aerial in the attic space. She packed the transceiver carefully in canvas wrapping. As she replaced the panel and prepared to leave, she heard sound from above. Footsteps, multiple persons, boots on wooden floors, German voices. Durchsuchen Sie alle Räume. Search all rooms. They had returned. Kessler had decided not to wait. He had brought troops to conduct an immediate search. Yekaterina extinguished her flashlight. She stood in absolute darkness, holding her transceiver, hearing soldiers moving through the library above. Furniture being shifted, books being pulled from shelves, systematic searching. They would search the cellar. They would find her here. She reviewed her options in seconds. She could not escape up the stairs. She could not hide the transceiver anywhere it would not be found. She could not be captured with it. Her hand found the small pistol in her coat pocket. A Nagant revolver. 7 rounds. She had carried it for months, never expecting to use it. She had kept it for one specific purpose: to avoid capture and interrogation. The cellar door opened. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Hinuntergehen. Go down. 2 soldiers descended the stairs. Yekaterina pressed herself against the wall behind a shelf, holding the transceiver in one arm and the pistol in her other hand. The soldiers swept their lights across the cellar. One pointed at the shelves. Alte Bücher. Nichts. Old books. Nothing. But they would check thoroughly. They would find her. Yekaterina made her decision. Not tonight. She had transmitted the intelligence about Dreher. The partisan operation was planned for tomorrow. She could not be captured and reveal what she knew. But she would not kill herself before she had to. She set the transceiver carefully on the floor. She stepped away from it. She raised her hands. Nicht schießen, she called out. Don't shoot. The flashlights found her immediately. Both soldiers shouted in alarm. One leveled his rifle. The other called up the stairs for the officer. Moments later, Kessler descended. His face showed no surprise, only a kind of grim satisfaction. Frau Sokolova, he said quietly. The librarian. Ghost 7. He ordered the soldiers to search her. They found the pistol. They found the transceiver behind the shelf. Kessler examined the radio with professional interest. Excellent construction. You built this yourself? Yekaterina said nothing. You will answer questions, Kessler continued, his voice still quiet. You will tell us everything. Your contacts, your codes, your schedule, everything. Still she remained silent. Kessler nodded to the soldiers. They bound her wrists. They brought her upstairs. A staff car waited outside. They drove through dark streets to Gestapo headquarters at the Hotel Europa. The interrogation room was in the basement. Bare concrete walls, a single table and 2 chairs, a drain in the floor, bright electric lights that never dimmed. Kessler questioned her for 6 hours. He was not brutal. Not yet. He simply asked questions with patient persistence. Who were her partisan contacts? How did she communicate? What operations had she coordinated? What was she planning next? Yekaterina answered nothing. She sat with her bound hands in her lap and her eyes on the wall, and gave him only silence. At dawn, Kessler left. 2 guards remained. Yekaterina was given water but no food. She sat and thought about what would come. She had seen the results of Gestapo interrogation. She knew what they would eventually do. She knew she would break. Everyone broke. It was only a matter of time. But she also knew that time mattered. Dreher was scheduled to arrive this afternoon. If she could say nothing until after the partisan operation, her silence would be worth it. Every hour of resistance was an hour for the partisans to act. The morning passed slowly. Through the small window high on the wall, she could see a square of sky brightening from gray to pale blue. She thought about her brother Dmitri. She thought about the library and the thousands of books she had loved. She thought about the invisible network she had woven across these 2 years. 7 partisan groups, hundreds of transmissions, operations that had struck the Germans again and again. Ghost 7 had been real. Ghost 7 had mattered. At 2 in the afternoon, Kessler returned with 2 SS non-commissioned officers. Their expressions told her the next phase would be different. "One more opportunity," Kessler said. "Speak now. Tell us what we need to know, or we will obtain the information through other methods." Yekaterina looked at him directly for the first time. "I am a Soviet citizen," she said quietly. "I have nothing to say to fascist occupiers." Kessler nodded. He stepped back. The 2 sergeants moved forward. The brutality began. They used methodical violence designed to cause maximum pain without rendering her unconscious. They wanted her aware and capable of speech. They broke bones in her hands. They burned her with cigarettes. They beat her with rubber truncheons that left few visible marks, but transmitted agony through every nerve. Yekaterina screamed. She could not help it. But she did not speak. She retreated somewhere inside herself, where the pain could not quite reach. She counted seconds. She thought about nothing but holding on. 1 more minute. 1 more hour. At 4:30, Kessler called a halt. Yekaterina hung semi-conscious from the restraints that held her upright. Blood ran from her mouth. Her hands were ruined. But she had given them nothing. "We will resume in 1 hour, Kessler said. "Consider carefully. This will continue until you speak or until you die. The choice is yours." They left her alone. She hung in the restraints and tried to calculate time. Dreher's convoy should be approaching Lapel. The partisan ambush was planned for 5 kilometers outside town. The attack would happen within the next hour, if it happened at all. At 5:15, distant explosions rattled the windows, then sustained gunfire, automatic weapons, grenades, the sound of a major engagement outside town. Kessler ran from the building with every available soldier. Yekaterina heard vehicles starting, shouting. More explosions. The partisan attack had occurred. The ambush was happening. She hung in her restraints and allowed herself a small, broken smile. She had held long enough. The sounds of battle continued for 20 minutes, then gradually subsided. Vehicles returned to the Hotel Europa. Boots pounded on stairs. Urgent German voices shouted reports. When Kessler returned to the interrogation room 2 hours later, his face was ashen with fury. "Standartenführer Dreher is dead," he said, his voice shaking. "His entire convoy destroyed, 32 soldiers killed. You knew. You transmitted the intelligence. You coordinated this attack." Yekaterina said nothing, but her eyes confirmed everything. Kessler struck her across the face. Once. Twice. Then he regained control and stepped back. "You will talk," he said. "I will break you. I will learn everything. Every contact. Every code. Every partisan you have helped. And then I will execute you in the market square as an example." But he never got the chance. At dawn the next morning, a partisan force of nearly 200 fighters launched a coordinated assault on Lapel. The attack had been planned for weeks. Multiple groups that had operated independently now struck together. Ghost 7 had coordinated their final operation before her capture. The assault targeted German headquarters, the Gestapo building, and the main garrison. The fighting was fierce and sustained. Partisan units equipped with captured German weapons fought with the desperation of soldiers who knew this was their only chance. The Germans fought back hard. But they were surprised and outnumbered. The partisan forces had intelligence about every defensive position. They knew which buildings housed which units. They knew where ammunition was stored. They knew everything. Because Ghost 7 had told them everything over the past 2 years. The battle lasted 6 hours. By noon, the partisans controlled the center of town. German forces had retreated to defensive positions on the outskirts. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties. The partisans knew they could not hold the town against inevitable German reinforcements. But that was not the goal. The goal was to free the Gestapo prisoners. A partisan assault team fought their way into the Hotel Europa. They cleared the building room by room. They reached the basement. They found Yekaterina still bound to the wall of the interrogation room, barely conscious, her body broken, but still alive. They carried her out through streets filled with smoke and debris. They retreated through the eastern districts toward the forests before German reinforcements arrived. By nightfall, they had vanished into the wilderness they knew better than any pursuer. Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova survived. Partisan medics saved her life, though they could not save her hands. The torture had destroyed the fine motor control she had once possessed. She would never operate a radio transmitter again. She was evacuated to Soviet-controlled territory in October 1943 as the Red Army's advance made such movements possible. She spent 4 months in a military hospital, recovering from her injuries. Soviet intelligence debriefed her extensively about her operations and her capture. Her reports helped improve security protocols for partisan radio operators across all occupied territories. In March 1944, the Soviet government awarded Yekaterina the Order of the Red Banner for exceptional service in partisan operations. In September 1944, she received the Order of the Patriotic War, First Class. In January 1945, she was named a Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest recognition the nation could bestow. The citation read in part, "For exceptional courage and dedication in organizing partisan resistance operations, for coordinating multiple combat units while operating under conditions of extreme danger, and for maintaining discipline and silence under torture, thereby protecting the lives of fellow resistance fighters and contributing significantly to the liberation of Soviet territory." After the war, Yekaterina could not return to her library work. Her injuries prevented the careful handling of books and documents. Instead, she joined the faculty of the Vitebsk Teachers Institute, teaching history and library science. She lectured about information organization and the importance of preserving cultural institutions even in wartime. She never married. She lived quietly in a small apartment in Vitebsk. Former partisans would visit occasionally, men and women who remembered the voice that had guided them, the intelligence that had saved their lives. She would make tea with her ruined hands and listen to their stories. She died in 1967 at the age of 58. The official cause was complications from her wartime injuries that had never fully healed. Her funeral in Vitebsk drew hundreds of mourners. 7 elderly men and women, former partisan commanders, served as her honor guard. Each had once known her only as a disembodied voice on a radio. Each owed their survival to intelligence she had provided. They stood at attention beside her coffin, these old soldiers remembering the woman who had been their eyes and ears when they fought in the darkness. The main library in Lepel, rebuilt after the war, was renamed the Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova Library in 1968. A bronze plaque near the entrance reads, "In memory of the quiet librarian who became the voice of resistance. Her courage saved lives. Her sacrifice will not be forgotten." In the basement of that library, behind a locked door, a small museum preserves her story. Photographs of Yekaterina before and after the war, her library card catalog, a replica of her radio transceiver built from her specifications, copies of German intelligence reports about Ghost 7, testimonials from partisan commanders, her medals displayed under glass. School groups visit regularly. Young people stand in the cellar where she once broadcast and try to imagine the courage required to operate night after night, while German troops searched for her. They see her photograph on the wall. The quiet woman in wire-rimmed spectacles. The unremarkable librarian who coordinated attacks that killed hundreds of enemy soldiers. The most affecting exhibit is simplest. A single quote from her post-war testimony, written in her own hand. "I did what I could with what I had. I was a librarian who understood radios and codes. I had access to information and the technical means to transmit it. So I did. Not because I was brave, but because it was necessary, because our people were fighting and dying, and I could help them fight more effectively and die less frequently. That was enough reason. It had to be enough." Every May 9th, on Victory Day, the library holds a special ceremony. Veterans and students gather in the reading room where German officers once browsed shelves, while the woman stamping their books memorized their secrets. They observe a moment of silence. They read the names of partisans whose operations Ghost 7 coordinated. They honor the memory of a woman who proved that resistance could flourish anywhere, carried forward by anyone with courage and dedication. The lesson endures. That heroism is not always loud or obvious. That the greatest acts of resistance sometimes occur in silence. That an ordinary person in an unremarkable position, armed with skill and determination, can become a force that shakes empires. Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova was that person. The quiet librarian who became Ghost 7, who coordinated operations across hundreds of square kilometers while sitting 300 meters from German headquarters, who transmitted intelligence that shaped the course of partisan warfare in an entire region, who suffered torture but never revealed her secrets, who survived to witness victory but never sought recognition. The Nazis searched for 2 years. They deployed their best equipment and their most experienced counterintelligence officers. They executed suspects and ransacked buildings. They were hunting for a military signals expert, a trained operative, a man of action. They never imagined the truth. They never suspected the quiet woman in wire-rimmed spectacles who stamped their library cards with a polite smile. They never realized that Ghost 7 stood before them every single day, hiding in the most perfect disguise imaginable. The disguise of ordinary insignificance. The camouflage of being exactly what she appeared to be, and therefore beneath suspicion. That was her genius. That was her weapon. Not invisibility, but its opposite. Complete visibility as something utterly harmless. The librarian. Always there, always helpful, always overlooked, until the night when she descended to her hidden transmitter and became someone else entirely. The voice in the darkness that spoke to desperate men in frozen forests. The coordinator who turned scattered groups into an effective resistance network. The intelligence operative who learned the enemy's secrets simply by listening while she worked. Ghost 7. The name the Germans gave her, never knowing they had also given her the greatest tribute. A ghost is something feared, something that cannot be caught, something that moves through walls and strikes from nowhere. She was all of those things. And she was also simply Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova, who loved books, who memorized frequencies and call signs with the same devotion she once memorized library catalogs, who believed information was power, and that power must serve justice. Her story reminds us that war is not fought only on battlefields by soldiers in uniform. It is fought in 1,000 invisible places by people whose weapons are knowledge and courage, and an absolute refusal to surrender. Who resist not because they are extraordinary, but because circumstances demand it, and they possess the skills to answer that demand. The library still stands in Leppel. The books still rest on shelves. Students still study at tables worn smooth by generations of readers, and beneath it all, in a quiet cellar, a simple plaque marks the place where one woman changed history. Here stood Ghost 7. 4 words. But behind them, 1,000 transmissions, 100 operations, countless lives saved, an empire of resistance, built from nothing but courage and the technical elegance of invisible signals traveling through darkness. None forgotten. Nothing forgotten. The promise we make to those who gave everything for freedom. Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova, the librarian who became a legend, the voice that the enemy could never silence. Eternal glory to the heroes. Eternal memory to those who resist oppression in all its forms. Eternal gratitude to the ordinary people who become extraordinary when history demands it. Her story ends here. But its lesson continues, that resistance lives wherever courage plants it, that tyranny can be opposed by anyone with determination and skill, that the quietest voices sometimes speak the loudest truths, and that a librarian with a radio transmitter can be more dangerous than an army. Ghost 7 proved it for 2 years, every single night, until they caught her. And even then, she won, because the operation she coordinated before her capture killed the SS commander who had terrorized an entire region, because the partisans she had guided for so long rescued her before the enemy could break her completely, because she survived to see victory, because her methods became models for resistance networks across occupied territories, because her story inspired generations of people who faced their own battles against darkness. She won because she never stopped being who she was. The careful librarian who approached radio operations with the same meticulous organization she brought to book catalogs, who treated intelligence work as information science, who understood that facts, properly organized and transmitted, become weapons as powerful as any rifle. The Nazis burned libraries across Europe, believing they could destroy knowledge and memory. They did not understand that knowledge lives in people, that memory survives in those who refuse to forget, that a single person who loves information and knows how to share it can preserve more than any building. Yekaterina understood. She was a librarian to her core, and librarians are guardians of books, of knowledge, of truth. She guarded all three through years of darkness. She kept faith with her principles and her people. She transmitted truth when lies dominated. She organized resistance when chaos threatened. She preserved memory even as the enemy tried to erase it. That is her legacy. Not just the operations she coordinated or the enemies she helped defeat, but the example she set of dedication to truth, of service to others, of quiet competence deployed against evil, of ordinary life transformed into extraordinary resistance. The library named in her honor serves students and scholars 78 years after her final transmission. The books she once cataloged are gone, replaced by new volumes. But the mission continues: to preserve knowledge, to serve learning, to guard truth against those who would suppress it. And in the basement, the museum reminds every visitor that this work is not always safe, that librarians have sometimes been warriors, that the woman who stamps your books might be a hero you will never recognize. Ghost 7 taught that lesson. The quiet woman who was never quite as quiet as she seemed, who spoke most powerfully when she said nothing at all, who transmitted the only messages that truly mattered, intelligence that saved lives, courage that inspired resistance, silence that protected her comrades, and truth that survives every attempt to destroy it. This is her story, as complete as records and memory allow, a story of one woman who became an invisible army, who fought the occupiers with information and coordination, who proved that the most powerful weapon is sometimes the simplest: a radio transmitter, a trained mind, an unbreakable will. The Germans never understood how they had been defeated. They found Ghost 7 in the end. They captured the transmitter. They knew the woman. But they never truly understood how she had operated so effectively for so long. How she had hidden in plain sight. How the librarian had become the operator they hunted. Because they never understood that courage comes in many forms. That heroism does not always announce itself. That the most dangerous enemies are sometimes those who appear most harmless. Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova, teacher of that lesson. Proof of that truth. Her voice is silent now. The frequencies she once used carry other traffic. The codes have changed. The war she fought has passed into history. But on quiet evenings in the Lepel Library, when the last patrons have left and the lights are dimmed, some say you can still feel her presence. The devoted librarian moving through familiar rooms, checking that books are properly shelved, ensuring that knowledge is preserved and accessible, maintaining the order she loved. And perhaps, in the deepest hours of night, you might hear the faint echo of Morse code, Ghost 7 transmitting one final message across time, not to partisans in frozen forests, but to all of us who face our own darkness. That resistance is possible, that courage can be quiet, that ordinary people possess extraordinary strength, that truth matters, that memory endures, that freedom is worth any sacrifice, message received, message understood, message remembered. Ghost 7 signing off, but never truly silent, because some voices transcend mortality, some stories must be told and retold, some heroes must never be forgotten. This was hers. This is ours. This will be remembered. Always. For the motherland, for freedom, for truth. None forgotten. Nothing forgotten. Eternal glory to the heroes. Eternal memory to Yekaterina Mikhailovna Sokolova, the librarian who saved an army. Ghost 7.